She claimed Mr. Borden was the one in the room and that he was scratching her. It was summertime, she had on a tank top, so I look over at her and I can see scratches appearing on her chest and on her shoulders without her touching herself. So I was like, well, if you're going to pick on somebody your own size. I won't even fight back. And I put my hands behind my back. And when I did that, something grabbed my elbows and started pushing me. And so I pushed back. And then it pushed me. And then I pushed back. And finally I said, is that all you can do? And as soon as I said that, wham, it just threw me up against the wall. So that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute, there might actually be something to this ghost stuff. All right, well, how's everybody doing tonight? No, come on, the right answer is weird. How's everybody doing tonight? Weird. All right, we're going to get a lot weirder too. So I'm going to ask, I know you came here to hear me speak, but I'm going to ask a lot of questions tonight. And the first question is, how many folks here believe in ghosts? Who doesn't believe in ghosts? Like, I'm not talking like you're not sure, you just outright don't believe. All right, so if there are any ghosts here, we're going to sacrifice you to them first. So these are all the ways that you can follow me online if you want to do so. I always say I'm very lonely. I spend all day in front of the computer, so please reach out with any of your ghost questions, any of your paranormal questions, any of your, I don't know, pro wrestling questions, anything you want to ask, because, again, I work all day long in front of the computer, so I want people to interact with me and engage with me. So I'm going to go through a little bit more of some of my credentials here, because it kind of explains why I do the things that I do. I am the host of Spooky South Coast. How many folks have heard Spooky South Coast before? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. That might be a record for a show that's been on 18 years. I'm surprised. We have 700 and something episodes, so if you guys want to catch up, I can wait. Got plenty of time. So I started that show in 2006. I was working at a radio station as a co-host of a sports show. And they came and they asked me if I wanted to do anything else. And I said, well, I'd love to do a show on the paranormal. And they said, like, ghosts and aliens and stuff? And I said, yeah. They said, all right, well, when do you want to do it? And I said, Saturday nights at 10 o'clock is the only time on my schedule I have free. And they said, yeah, that's fine. Because at that time, like, let's call that radio graveyard. Nobody has any programs going on. So as long as nobody had to come and actually let me in the building, they were fine with it. So that started off, we thought it was going to be very small time. Just be something that would be on the local radio in New Bedford. And we tried to do this thing called podcasting that everybody was trying out. And it worked. And we thought we were a huge success when we had 100 downloads the first day. Now we get 1 million downloads pretty much every month. So it really has grown over the years. When we started, we were only one of only 5 paranormal shows available as podcasts. Now there's like 5 million of them. But my work on that led me to get invited to, has anybody ever listened to Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM? It was like the biggest overnight radio show in the world. Now it's hosted by George Norrie. But when Art Bell was the host, he got into some problems with the radio network, and he left and started his own radio network called, Dark Matter Digital Network. And he wanted Spooky South Coast to come on his network, so we went over to there, and they would rebroadcast our show. Art had a show there called Midnight in the Desert. When he retired, my friend Dave Schrader took it over, and I became Dave's fill-in host whenever he had to go out and film TV shows or whatever. And then eventually Dave had such a busy schedule that I ended up taking over the show Midnight in the Desert. I was the host of that show for about 3 months at the beginning of 2020, maybe 4. And then what happened was new owners bought the network. They wanted to know if I was going to push their flat earth, 9/11 was an inside job, COVID isn't real conspiracy theories. And I said, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. So they said, okay, well, we don't need your services. So I started Midnight.fm with some friends and my show Midnight Society. And we've done a couple of hundred, probably about 300 or 400 episodes of that. We're on hiatus right now, but I'm very proud of the work that we've done on that. I've actually gotten to interview everybody from the guy who played Chekhov on Star Trek to the guy that was in Weezer, that was the bass player, and ended up creating all the music for my show. So it was a really, really fun journey doing paranormal radio all these years. But my work in paranormal radio led me to meet some interesting people. One of those folks is Jeff Belanger, who I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen speak at libraries before. Jeff and I started a company called Legend Trips, where we would go out and host ghost hunt events at different historic haunted locations. And we started this company because we saw a lot of these ghost hunts that would go on, would bring in these celebrity investigators, and everybody would get so excited over what celebrity was there that nobody was really paying attention to the location itself. And we're like, wait a minute, you're here in one of the most haunted places in the world with unprecedented access, and all you care more about is getting the autograph and hanging out with the person that's on TV? So we created Legend Trips with the idea of the location would be the star of the event. And to date, we raised probably about $50,000 for these historic haunts. But my work looking into locations for that led to me getting a job on a show called Ghost Stalkers. That was started by Nick Groff, who was one of the cast members of Ghost Adventures. When he decided to leave, he remembered me from when we had met in Fall River when I filmed the Lizzie Borden episode of Ghost Adventures. And we had always been talking about something we could work on together. So he reached out and said, I'm looking for a researcher. Would you like the job? And I said, hell yeah, I would. So I worked on that show. It is the 6 best episodes of paranormal television you've probably never seen. But we're very proud of everything that we did on it. And what's interesting is that led to me getting a job on the show Ghost Asylum. If you watch that show, I was the writer, the researcher, and the producer on that, but I had nothing to do with the ghost traps. So at the end of every episode, they tried to trap a ghost, they tried to trap a ghost in a screen door. I have no idea why they thought that would work, but I had nothing to do with that part. I only had to do with the history and the location. And then I got a chance to work on the show Haunted Towns because they moved the guys from that show over to Haunted Towns. So I helped kind of develop the concept of that. And I found all the locations. And what's interesting about working in paranormal TV, you'd think that that'd be a great gig, right? My paycheck actually went down with each show that I worked on and the more titles that I accumulated. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. I went from being a lowly writer researcher to now I'm a producer and I'm making half as much as I used to before. That doesn't make any sense. I actually found out that, I found this out years later, when I worked on Ghost Stalkers, I got more money per episode than the 2 people who were on the cast. And this guy here, Chad Lindbergh, he's an actor that was on he was in the Fast and the Furious and a bunch of other things. He was on Supernatural. And so he's making less money per episode than I was. So I guess I had a pretty good gig there because I got to sit at home and write all these episodes. And him and John Tenney had to go sleep in an RV outside haunted places and share a shower and all that kind of stuff. I don't know for a fact they shared a shower, but I just like to imagine that at night when I'm thinking about it on my own. So I've had the chance to work in front of the camera on a couple of TV series too. One of them is called Hotel Paranormal, which is a show where they feature different haunted hotel stories. Makes sense, right? And my job on that show was to kind of give analysis of why these hotels might be haunted. But the show is narrated by Dan Aykroyd, which I thought was really cool. And people always say, oh, did you get to work with Dan Aykroyd? What was that like? Well, I know. I did my thing, and then he came in later and did his thing. But we do share a credit on imdb.com. So as far as I'm concerned, that pretty much makes me an official Ghostbuster. Look for me in the sequel. And then also I was in a documentary called Famously Haunted Amityville. I've been obsessed with the Amityville case since I was 11 years old, and I bought the paperback at a flea market. So when I started doing Spooky South Coast, we did a lot of episodes about Amityville. And I got to talk to the journalists that covered the story originally. I got to talk to the news reporters that covered it. I got to talk to one of the actual Lutz kids that lived in the house and experienced the hauntings. So it caught the attention of the producers, and they had us actually go down to Amityville to film this documentary. And they said, we're going to make it so that you can investigate the house. And I said, oh my God, this is a dream come true. They said, the only problem is you can't go in the house. Okay, well, you can park outside the house and run some experiments and see what you did. I brought my best friend with me, Stephanie Burke, who is a psychic medium. We're going to talk about her a little bit later. And so here we are, and we rented a white Ford Bronco or whatever SUV because we thought it would make us look like we were the police. And because there's all these signs outside the Amityville house. No parking, no stopping, no photos, all this stuff. So we figured if we were in that car, we could get away with stopping for a little bit before they moved us along. But every time we'd stop and get ready to try to do something, a car would come along. And so we'd move and we'd go around the neighborhood and come back until we didn't get, trying not to get caught. And when the shoot was over, we were telling the producers this story while we were all having drinks around the hotel bar. And the producer said, oh my God, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. Forgot to tell us what? We got special permission from the police for you to park outside the house so that you could run some experiments. We're like, oh, now you tell us. So we actually went the next day before we left town and did a little experimentation. And so we're pretty much the only people since Ed and Lorraine Warren that have investigated the Amityville house, even though we were a couple hundred yards outside of it. So tonight we're going to talk about, not the Dead of Dedham, I didn't change that, but anyway, we're going to talk about the Bridgewater Triangle. How many folks here have heard of the Bridgewater Triangle? Great, so I don't really have to get too much into the history of the Bridgewater Triangle. Let's get into the history of the Bridgewater Triangle. So the Bridgewater Triangle was something that was coined, a term that was coined by Loren Coleman. Loren Coleman was is a cryptozoologist. But he moved here in the 1970s. His day job was working with troubled youth. And then in his spare time, he would go out and he would investigate weird cases, what we call Fortean research, named after Charles Fort. And so Loren was collecting all these reports from this place he had never heard of called Bridgewater, Massachusetts. And he got stories from Bridgewater proper, East Bridgewater, and West Bridgewater. And then he started to realize that those three Bridgewaters formed a natural triangle. At the time that he was doing this research, the Bermuda Triangle was hugely popular because the 1975 book by Charles Berlitz had just come out and the NBC TV movie about it had just come out. So Loren's thinking to himself, well, if I push this as a Bridgewater Triangle, that might help it with a little bit of marketing. So in his 1983 book, he wrote about Mysterious America. He wrote about the Bridgewater Triangle, and it took the paranormal world by storm. No, it didn't. Nobody even batted an eye at this, and nobody had heard about it for another 10 or 15 years. What happened was, in the late 90s, a couple of researchers named Chris Pittman and Chris Balzano, who, unbeknownst to them, when they were working together at a sub shop, I think in the Woburn area, neither one of them realized that the other one was interested in all this stuff. Years after they worked together, they both ended up forming these websites about the Bridgewater Triangle that were, completely different from each other, but shared a lot of the same stories. That caught the attention of a film student from Dartmouth named Aaron Cadieux, and Aaron made his senior project a short film called Inside the Bridgewater Triangle. And so when we were talking about the triangle on the I think it was the 4th episode of Spooky South Coast, we had found something about it online. We knew we wanted to cover it because nobody had ever heard of it. And so we brought in the Chris's, we brought in Aaron, and I said to Aaron, are you going to release that documentary commercially? And he said, well, see, here's the problem. I used licensed music in it because it was just for class, so now I can't release it. I can't even put it on the internet because I didn't pay for the rights to the music. And he gave me a DVD copy of it, though, and I said, you can't upload it to the internet, but maybe I can. So I put it on something that was called Google Video, which was like the precursor to YouTube, and it got a lot of attention. And so that led to Aaron and his co-director, Manny Famolare, deciding in 2013 to make a feature-length documentary called The Bridgewater Triangle, which many of you have probably seen. But if you haven't seen it, it's on Amazon Prime. It's also available for free on YouTube, so you can check it out. Just make sure you get the one that's from Bristol County Media, because there's a bunch of knockoffs that aren't nearly as good. There's one that somebody made that's even a cartoon version of Aaron Cadieux, like going out into the Bridgewater Triangle, like wearing his little Red Sox hat and everything. It's pretty entertaining, but it's not nearly as good as the actual documentary, and I'm not saying that just because I'm in it. But what's happened is, as we've talked about the triangle, we've had to kind of expand what we define as the borders of the triangle. So the original East Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, Bridgewater proper had to become expanded because of the amount of reports that have come in of phenomena that seems related to the triangle. So by the time they made the documentary film, they were looking at it being way up here, like in the Abington area, and then down into the Rehoboth area, and then down into like the Dartmouth, New Bedford area. Now, and then of course the heart of the triangle right there is the Hockomock Swamp. I've actually decided that we need to expand the borders of the triangle even further, and this is how I would define it. I'm going all the way up to Salem, New Hampshire, where America's Stonehenge is. I'm going all the way out to Cape Cod, and I'm going all the way down into western Rhode Island. But what I will say is, these are not hard borders. It's not a hard triangle. In my opinion, the Bridgewater Triangle is a living thing. And it is expanding, it is growing, and the more attention that we pay to it, and the more that we talk about it, the more it's going to have these weird reports for us to document. And the more that we document them, the more people become comfortable talking about them, and then you realize how many more there actually are. So to me, I think it's actually more of what John Keel, the man who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, he was another Fortean researcher, he called these places window areas. And so that's kind of how I would define it more. It's a window into the other dimension, the other world. So before we start talking about the ghost of the Bridgewater Triangle, let's define what we think that a ghost is. Somebody must have a definition. Somebody raise your hand. What's a ghost? All right, somebody shout it out. What's a ghost? I think most people would say that. Most people would think that a ghost is a disembodied soul. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, because I don't know that I believe in the idea of a soul. I know that there's a consciousness that makes us up, and I do believe that those consciousnesses are all connected. And in fact, I look at it like this. Collective consciousness is like the internet, and we're all the individual workstations that connect to the internet. So eventually our batteries die and we can't connect anymore. But that doesn't mean that everything that we ever did and uploaded goes away. It still stays out there. And so I think that that's probably more of what being human is all about. But for some reason, maybe it can retain who we are and our identity, which we'll get into why that might be. Another idea is that a ghost could be a psychological imprint. And the best way I can describe this is, if you've ever walked into a room where two people have just been arguing, but nobody's saying anything, yet you can feel that tension in the room, you're like, whoa, what happened in here? That's a psychological imprint. They've left a little piece of whatever was going on in that room behind them. So to me, that explains a lot of some of these ghosts that we experience in places where there have been tragedy, like the Lizzie Borden house, another thing we'll talk about later. A third definition for a ghost could be that it is a thought form or an egregore or what the Tibetans called tulpas. And the idea behind this is that this is a ghost that we are making with our minds. And we'll talk about the Lizzie Borden house in the sense of the ghosts that are there related to the history of it, but it's also entirely possible that the ghosts that are at the Lizzie Borden house are things that we've made up, because nobody really reported any ghost activity there until it opened up as a bed and breakfast in 1996. Then people started going there and talking about the murders every day and saying, gee, if any place would ever be haunted, it would be this place. So maybe we've actually created those ghosts with our mind. We've put it out there. And there's actually been experimentation that proves that this can happen. In the 1970s, the Toronto Society for Psychical Research conducted what they called the Philip experiment, where they brought together a cross-section of humanity, of society. They all sat together around a table, teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, all these different people, and they created the backstory of a character named Philip, somebody who never existed. They made the whole thing up. But then they conducted seances, and they were able to speak and communicate with Philip. So did they create a ghost? Did they put a consciousness out there in the ether that they created on their own? Or was it maybe the people that were in that room during the seance being able to affect everything that was around them with that thought? It doesn't matter to me either way. I think that they're both very intriguing. But I kind of do like the idea that when we go into a haunted place and we say, okay, if there's a ghost right here right now, we want you to open that door over there. If it really opened, we all would have just like ran out screaming, right? And then the door would open. Now, is that a ghost? Is that another being out there that did that? Or did all of us collectively will that door to be opened? I think if we can do that, if we can use that other 90% of our brains that we don't use to do things like that, that would be awesome. And you know what? I'd also much rather believe that if I'm sitting on the couch, I can make that remote that I left on the other side of the room fly into my hand like a Jedi than to think that my dead grandmother's watching me while I'm in the shower. Another idea is that a ghost could be a time slip or a quantum event. A time slip is something we have all experienced. We've all had deja vu. And that is really a time slip. You kind of come out of the moment that you're in, and you're in this other realm for a couple of seconds being like, did I already do this? Has this already happened? This feels really familiar. And so that's a little bit of a time slip, but they can be a lot more prolonged than that too. There's a story of a gentleman who was driving to a destination, and when he was on his way to that destination, he had to pass through a town he had been through many, many times before. But when he got to the downtown area of that town, instead of looking like it always had, it looked like something out of the 1800s. And he said, what's going on here? What did they do to this downtown area? Anyway, I got to get to where I'm going. He went to his destination, did what he had to do, and when he came back through to go home, that town looked exactly like he had always remembered it before. So what happened there? Did he go back in time? Perhaps he did. Perhaps there was just that little bit of a moment where he slipped into another dimension or a time period. And that idea of another dimension is what comes about from quantum physics. Anybody here a quantum physicist? No, one of these days I'm going to say that, and like Neil deGrasse Tyson will be in the back of the room, and he'll be like, actually, Tim, and then I'll know I'm screwed. But basically, a quantum event is the idea that there is what we call the multiverse. Not the Marvel multiverse, certainly not the DC multiverse. That's a mess. But the idea that there are multiple versions of the universe happening all at once. So I like to look at it like this. Every eventuality is a reality. So, sir, this morning when you got up and had breakfast, did you have a choice between a couple of different things?
Did you have a choice this morning at breakfast between a couple of things?
What did you choose between?
Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch, or what else? What else could you have had?
With Cheerios.
Okay, so you had Cinnamon Toast Crunch? So this morning you had that, and this is the realm of existence where you had Cinnamon Toast Crunch. There's another reality where you chose Cheerios. That could be exactly the same, and it could have brought you right back to the same place, or you could have become president of the United States, in which case you probably wouldn't be here right now. But there is that possibility that every choice that we've ever made leads to a different reality, and sometimes those realities can rub up against each other, which might be what we're seeing when we see a ghost. Which means that we see these other beings as ghosts, but they might also see us as ghosts. So we say, well, how come we see people that are dressed up from the 1600s? Well, maybe in their version of 2023, that's how they dress. But I also wonder, too, what would happen if we talk to them about the ghosts that they see. They say, I don't know what these ghosts are all about, but I see them, they have like pink spiked hair and nose rings and ripped up skinny jeans. And I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't the best impression that we could leave on history. But the bottom line is it's all energy. And the one of the first two laws of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed. And so the energy that makes us up when we die is supposed to go off and form bonds with other energies. It doesn't dissipate, it doesn't die, it just goes off and forms other bonds. And sometimes, for some reason, it might hold that energetic shape of whatever we were. So we've kind of gone through the idea of what a ghost is. Do you want to hear some actual ghost stories now? Ghost stories from the Bridgewater Triangle? Now, another part that I will say about these ghost stories is that a lot of them could just be legends. They might not have any truth to them. And one of those such legends is the story of the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44. This is a story that became prominent in the early 1990s when a book called The New England Ghost Files came out. But people swear that they'd been having experiences with the red-headed hitchhiker for decades before that. The way the story goes is you'll be driving down this stretch of Route 44 and you'll cross over from the Rehoboth-Seekonk line. And it doesn't matter which side of the road you're on, but you might be riding down the road, and as you're riding down the road, you see a man on the side with his thumb out looking for a ride. And he's wearing dirty jeans, dark, dirty boots, scuffed up. He's got on a dirty flannel shirt. He's got long, red, scraggly hair and a bushy red beard, so he kind of looks like any other resident of Rehoboth, but that joke works here because none of you are from Rehoboth. When I'm in Rehoboth, I have to totally change it. I'm like, he looks like somebody from Middleborough. Yeah, Middleborough. How do you know that the toothbrush was invented in Rehoboth? Because if it was invented anywhere else, it'd be called the teeth brush. All right, that's enough picking on Rehoboth. So you're driving down the road, you see this gentleman standing out there with his thumb out looking for a ride. You'll pull over to pick him up, and he'll get in the back seat even if you're the only person in the car. And you'll turn to him and say, hey, where are you headed? And he won't say anything. He'll just keep staring straight ahead, and he'll point down the road in the same direction that you were already heading. So you start driving down the road, and you try to make a little small talk with him. So, where are you from? How long you been out there hitchhiking? And no matter what you ask him, he won't answer at all. He'll just keep staring straight ahead with his dark, black, soulless eyes. And as you keep driving down the road, all of a sudden he'll start to giggle from the back seat. And then that giggle will turn into more of a chuckle. And then it becomes a guffaw. And then it becomes a deep belly laugh that becomes so loud and so annoying, you turn around and you say, hey buddy, you still... But when you turn around, he's gone. He disappeared from your car, even though you're driving 50 miles an hour down Route 44. But that's not the most unnerving part. There's a woman who said that after he disappeared from the back seat of her car, she was driving down the road and she was trying to forget what happened. She couldn't shake it from her mind. She couldn't get rid of that sound of his laughter from her ears. So she turned on the radio And she started singing along to one of her favorite songs. And she finally started to relax and calm down a little bit and think, gee, maybe this was all just in my mind. When all of a sudden the hitchhiker's laugh came from her car speakers, even after she shut the radio off. Another gentleman said that as he was driving down the road after the hitchhiker disappeared from his car, he was trying to do the same thing, just trying to do whatever he could to take his mind off of it. Let me just look out the window and take a look at the scenery. And when he looked out the driver's side window, there was the face of the red-headed hitchhiker following alongside his car while he went 50 miles an hour down the road. So as I said, we don't really know who this ghost could be. There's no records of anybody that was killed on that stretch of the road. There's no stories that the locals tell about somebody who that might be, who that might be the ghost of. So we like to look at this as maybe just a road legend. When the story became popular in the 70s, the 80s, and eventually published in the 90s, that's a time when we really started to warn people about the dangers of picking up a hitchhiker. So maybe this story serves as a cautionary tale about what could happen if you pick up a stranger off the side of the road. And that's the way that I've always told this story until the first time we did our stage show. We do a big thing where we have all these photos behind us. This is done by my friend Frank Grace. We have a whole show of all of his photos, and we tell ghost stories on stage in front of those photos. And after the show was over, we're out in the hallway talking with folks, and a gentleman comes up to me and says, I know that you said that the red-headed hitchhiker was a made-up legend, but my brother was an EMT in Rehoboth in the late 70s, and he distinctly remembers a young man that was struck by a car around that area who had long red hair and a bushy red beard and died. So maybe there is some truth to who the red-headed hitchhiker might be after all. This is the Fearing Tavern in Wareham, Massachusetts. Has anybody ever been to the Fearing Tavern? I recommend going there during the summertime. They open it up for tours, and I think it costs $3 to take the tour. It's well worth it. The original part of the home was built in 1690, and then they added on to it over the years. So this house has seen every moment of America's history and then some. It actually was involved in the American Revolution. Captain Israel Ferring lived in the house at the time, and he was the head of the militia in Wareham. And at that time, the militia in Fairhaven was under attack. So he got all of his troops together and said, come on, we're marching to Fairhaven to defend Fairhaven from the British. And all the Wareham militia said, why would we go to Fairhaven? We don't care about what happens in Fairhaven. We'll worry about it if they come here. And so he said, everybody get on the road and let's start marching. And it's the only time in American history where the commanding officer rode on his horse behind his troops, because he said he was threatening to shoot anybody that didn't walk all the way to Fairhaven. It was also involved in the War of 1812. The most feared ship in the British Navy, the Nimrod, pulled up in the waterway right across the street. The British soldiers came into the tavern. They all had some food and some drink. Then they had some more drink. They got really drunk, but hey, they were driving a boat, so it's okay. And as they were getting ready to leave and head back onto the ship, they grabbed a bunch of the men of Wareham and they brought them onto the ship with them. They sailed out around the point, then they pulled over toward Marion Harbor, got up close to the land, kicked them out of the boat and said, all right, go back to your houses and whatever. They had only taken them because they figured we had to show some kind of force while we were here or else we'd get in trouble for stopping and just drinking. So it was another example of why that tavern is so connected to the history of the area. And we were investigating it. We were the first people to ever investigate it because I used to work at a diner that was right behind it. And I would look out the window as I was washing dishes thinking, gee, if any place would be haunted, it'd be that one. So when I became a paranormal investigator, I asked the Historical Society if we could investigate, and they let us in. And there's something called electronic voice phenomenon. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the idea that ghosts can imprint their voices on recorded media. And they divide those into three categories: Class C, Class B, Class A. Class C is where everybody can kind of hear something, but nobody can really make out what's being said. Class B is where you can make it out, but not everybody agrees on what's being said. And Class A is where everybody hears it and they say, yep, that's what I heard. Now, most paranormal investigators will tell you you're lucky to only get maybe 1, 2, or a handful of Class A EVPs in your entire career. The gentleman that we had conducting EVP study with us that night told us that he got 135 Class A EVPs. And we said, no way. He played every single one of them for us, and I'll be damned if we didn't all agree on what was being said in every one. And we're actually going to play one of those for you in just a moment. But part of the reason we wanted to investigate there was because a friend of ours had had a personal experience in the Fearing Tavern. Every 5th grade Wareham student goes on a field trip to the Fearing Tavern, and kids kind of didn't like going there. They thought it was boring. They're like, it's Fearing Tavern Day, the worst. But now that they know that it's haunted, now it's more of like, oh yay, Fearing Tavern Day. But she had gone on her 5th grade field trip, and as they were walking through the oldest part of the house, as they stopped into this room, she saw an old woman sitting in that rocking chair knitting. And she smiled at the woman and waved, and the woman looked up at her and nodded and went back to her knitting, and they continued on with the tour. And at the end of the tour, the docent said, does anybody have any questions? And she raised her hand and said, I don't really have a question. I just want to make a comment. I thought it was really cool how you had that woman who looked like it was the 1600s knitting in that rocking chair. And the docent said the famous line that always happens in one of these stories, honey, I'm the only one working today. So that had kind of freaked her out, and so we brought her back with us when we did the investigation. And we're over here trying to get something to happen with the rocking chair, and nothing's happening. She walks away and goes into a bedroom a little bit further down the hallway and lets out a blood-curdling scream. And we go running in there, we're like, what's wrong? And she's looking at a photo on the wall, and she's like, that's her. That's the woman that I saw. And there's a picture of a woman sitting in a chair. I think she had some knitting in her lap and a dog in her lap, and she's looking up at the camera. And so my skeptical brain says, well, what really happened is you saw that photo when you were on the tour, and it kind of mixed it up in your mind that you thought you saw her sitting in that chair. And the president of the Historical Society looked at me and said, that's a great theory, except for the fact that we only found that photo a couple of years ago in another house in town, and we only hung it up there right after that. So when she came through on the tour, that photo didn't even hang on the wall here. So a little bit of a weird something that happened. But we've had all kinds of experiences that have happened there over the years. But the one that still gets me the most, there's 2 EVPs that I found to be very disturbing. One of them I'm not going to play for you tonight because I want to sleep tonight and I want you all to sleep too. But as we were walking down into the basement, we caught on a recorder the voice of a little girl saying, want to play dress up? And for some reason, little kid ones freak me out. But we also caught another voice. Now, there's a rumor that there's a tunnel in the basement of this tavern. And it goes underground and it goes across to the waterway so that when the tavern was in operation, they could bring all the supplies over from the boat without getting raided by the Native Americans or raided by the British. So we thought, my idea was if I could prove to the Historical Society where this tunnel is, that they were going to let me dig up the basement of this 400-year-old house. I was like, sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, it didn't work out that way. But we did find where there was a hollow spot in the floor. And as we were banging on the floor, we were kind of clearing off with our feet some of the dirt that was over that spot. And in that sound of us clearing it off, a voice comes through, and I'm going to play that for you right now. Nope. It didn't play. I'm going to play it now.
Det sound hollow? Probably not too thick, but it does sound hollow, yeah. Floor? Does it? It does. That sounds like a good floor. I think that's good.
So here's what we think is being said. Hey, Ashford, I killed Grandpa Ash. I just knew that you'd feel the pain. You can consider it a gift. So we're going to play that again with it on the screen, and we can kind of follow the bouncing ball.
Does it sound hollow? Probably not too thick, but it does sound hollow, yeah. Floor? Does it? It does. That sounds like a good floor. I think that's good.
So a little bit freaky there, but I can tell you that we've done as much research as we can. We found no connection to anybody named Ashford. We found no stories of anybody who killed anybody, a grandpa or otherwise. So I don't really know what that might be from. But it's also important to note that in those days, they wouldn't really have necessarily kept all those things down on record. So something could have happened, but we don't have any proof of it. That same night, we actually recorded a video in the building itself. There's a room over what was the original tavern room that they use as a storeroom. And now that storeroom is where they house some antique toys, including some dolls. And now I'm not a big believer in orbs. Is this going to go? Uh-oh. Well, I hyped it all up. But I'm not a big believer in orbs, but this was a situation where most orbs are dust or bugs or moisture. But this one actually went and took a beeline directly into one of the dolls. So let's see if I can get that going. There we go. Now it's going. So our friend Andrew Lake, who his dad was the meteorologist on Channel 10 in Providence for a number of years, Art Lake, he's one of the best investigators I know. He's the one who set up this camera, and he pointed it directly at the dolls, and you'll see, I don't know, can we turn the lights off a little bit, maybe? So you're going to watch right over on the left-hand side of the screen. Right around, oh, geez, I'm scared of the dark. No, it's fine, I'm just kidding, I'm kidding. Oh, look what I did. I swear I'm usually more technically savvy than this. So again, we're going to watch in this corner of the screen here. You're going to see this thing flitter in, and it's going to move straight toward one of the dolls. And we'll see it a couple of times on screen. So it's going to float in right around there. There it is. It's kind of zooming in right there. Goes into the doll and disappears. Would you like to see a closer look? Closer look. And right around here. There it is. Flutters in, right to the doll, disappears. Want to see that again? Again. There it is, and hits the doll and kind of disappears. So if it was dust or a bug or moisture, well, moisture would kind of fall straight down, but dust or a bug would kind of flitter all around and follow not an intelligent path. So Andy named this anomaly Tinkerbell. This is the Oliver Estate in Middleborough. Has anybody ever been to the Oliver Estate? Another great place worth going to. And this place is awesome because what they have done there is they have used the paranormal to completely renovate the building. It was falling apart. The town of Middleborough didn't know what to do with it. My friend Christy Parrish started running paranormal events out of it and ghost hunts, and not only did it come alive with activity, but they were able to raise a lot of money to be able to put a new roof on the place, to be able to put new shutters on, historic shutters, and one of the most important things, they were able to put in indoor plumbing so that we didn't have to use the porta potty out in the parking lot anymore. So now you can go there and you can have different experiences there, whether it be paranormal, whether it be some of their garden parties or their teas that they do. They do all kinds of events there. And I've had a number of experiences there over the years. One of the first things that happened to me there was I have a lot of experiences there with shadow people. Shadow people are these shadowy figures that will appear while we're investigating. Some people think that they might be ghosts that can't quite manifest, so you don't see the full-bodied apparition. Other people think that they might be a separate type of being unto themselves. But I know that we had one girl that was freaked out so much that she ran out of the building screaming because as we were standing there around each other, across from each other, the shadow people were coming around us and walking between us, and she just freaked out. She couldn't handle it. But I've never had anything negative happen there. We actually have a lot of light anomalies in the basement there too, including this one time a bar of light, like a fluorescent bulb, just appeared in the middle of the room about that high. It moved a couple of feet and then disappeared again. So just very strange anomalies that happened there. But one of the most recent times I was there investigating, the house wasn't really particularly active on this night, but the next morning, the security footage that Christy checks every day when she goes in caught something very interesting. So I'm going to play this clip for you This is the door to the basement right here, and there's a wooden bar that goes across the door. And it's the kind of wooden bar that sits in those two like metal hinges, and the two metal brackets, and you have to actually push it up out of those brackets to take that wooden bar out of the door. And we caught something very interesting. You see it just drop on its own. So I'm going to play it again. And just watch right on that bar right there. So something had to come up underneath that, push it out of those brackets to have it fall down like that. This is the Assonet Ledge in the Freetown State Forest. I'm sure a lot of folks have probably been out into the Freetown State Forest. You may have even been to the ledge. But it's a place that is considered to be very, very haunted. It's what I would actually call the real heart of the Bridgewater Triangle. And there's a whole book about it called Dark Woods by Chris Balzano, where he looks at the cults that have been out there, the true crime that's happened, the paranormal that's happened. But there's a very famous story about the Lady of the Ledge. The Lady of the Ledge was supposedly a Native American princess who was in love with an English settler, and her father, the great sachem, would not allow them to be together. So distraught, she went to the top of the ledge and she jumped from the top to her death. Some versions of the story say that when the settler found out about it, he went up to the top of the ledge and he did the same. What we do know is that people go up to the top of the ledge, they stand at the edge, and they have this overwhelming sense of dread and this feeling that they want to jump. Even if they're completely happy in their lives, just in that moment, they want to jump. This story has persisted for years to the point where my friend Matt Moniz, who co-hosts Spooky South Coast with me, he went up there with some friends in the 80s, and he saw this woman, just as they describe her, dressed all in white, walking toward him with her arms outstretched, and then she disappeared. And he told his friends about it, and they said, "You just saw the Lady of the Ledge." He had never heard the story about that to that point. So they told him all about that Native American princess. So all these years later, when we start Spooky South Coast, we get invited by the Freetown Historical Society to give a presentation. And we tell the story of the Lady of the Ledge, and a gentleman from the back stands up and says, "Great story, except for one small problem. That ledge is actually from a quarry that was dug out in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So before that, when the Native Americans lived there, there was no ledge. So there was no way that there was a Native American princess that jumped from the top. But yet people have still seen her. Moniz saw her. So what is it that causes that? Well, it might be one of those thought form ghosts that we talked about before, where the legend becomes so persistent that people actually go out there and they experience the legend. I use a line from the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And I'm not going to bore you with the whole plot details of it if you've never seen the film. Great film. But basically, Jimmy Stewart is coming clean that he wasn't the man who shot Liberty Valance. He's telling a newspaper reporter the truth. And when he's done telling the story, he asks the newspaper reporter, "Are you going to print the truth now?" And the newspaper reporter says, "Sir, this is the West. When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend." And that's what happens with the paranormal. When the legend becomes fact, you print the legend. So when people have these experiences, you talk about them. Even though you don't have any proof of where it might have come from, the legend itself becomes the story. This is the Millicent Library in Fairhaven. I always feel like when I'm in another library and I show a photo of this library, like I'm cheating on the library that I'm at. But this is considered to be one of the most haunted places, but yet everybody that works there swears it's not true. And I could tell you all about it, but I didn't make this really stupid TikTok video.
Correct legend that has persisted for decades in the town of Fairhaven, Massachusetts, that the body of Millicent Rogers is buried beneath the Millicent Library that bears her name. Millicent was born in 1873, the daughter of Henry Huddleston Rogers, a wealthy oil magnate who built many of the town's great buildings. She died in 1890 at the age of 17 of heart failure. Because she loved to read, the family built a library in her honor, and on September 21st, 1891, they laid the cornerstone at 6 in the morning, with only the family and their clergymen present. This led to the rumor that the family was actually burying Millicent Rogers' body under the cornerstone, and that the library serves as a giant headstone for her grave. Almost directly above the cornerstone, a giant stained glass window is erected that features the likeness of Millicent Rogers depicted as the muse of poetry. Above her is a portrayal of William Shakespeare, young Millie's favorite writer. Some say the window resembles the shape of a gravestone, and that led to the legend of it being Millicent Rogers' headstone for her body buried beneath the library's cornerstone. Rumors have persisted for years that the library is haunted. Some feel it is Millie Rogers roaming the 3 levels of books, thumbing through the stacks and looking for something to read. There are also stories of a ghostly janitor. A persistent legend is that the portraits in the Rogers room have eyes that will follow you no matter where you go. Employees have always denied that the library is haunted. The truth is, Millicent Rogers rests in the family mausoleum at Riverside Cemetery on Main Street in Fairhaven. She is interred there along with her father, mother, 2 of her siblings, and other members of the Rogers family. When looking through the iron gate into the crypt, Millicent's name, date of birth, and date of death can be seen engraved on the upper left side. Her body may be in the mausoleum and her ghost may be at rest as well, but her true spirit lives on in the library that bears her name.
So this is actually the first place that I ever investigated for the paranormal. I was working as a newspaper writer for the New Bedford Standard-Times, and I pitched a Halloween article where I'd go and do a ghost hunt. And the Millicent Library was nice enough to let me go there and do the investigation. I just had to go while they were open, and they weren't going to shut any of the lights off. Okay, we'll make it work. So when I went there, I went into that portrait room where you saw all the portraits with the eyes that supposedly follow you. And I'm walking around with my tape recorder asking questions. And I swear, I caught the voice of Satan himself on that recorder. Because you hear me say, "Is there anybody here? Can you tell us your name?" And then the recording comes through. And I was like, what the hell? I was freaking out. And then I stopped and I thought about it for a couple of minutes and I realized I was hungry. And I was walking around my recorder right up against my stomach. So that's the day that I learned that when I'm investigating for ghosts, you want to hold the recorder away from your body, or at least make sure you have a sandwich before you go. But there's also a story, that the library will tell, and again, they all say that it's not haunted, but they do talk about this grotesque that was on the outside of the library. It was going to fall down. Now, a grotesque is like a gargoyle, except it's just the face. So instead of being a three-dimensional being, a three-dimensional statue, it's a raised relief face. But it serves the same idea. It's to ward off evil spirits. And this one was going to come down, so they took it down intentionally, and they put it in the library director's office. And does anybody know who that is? What does it look like? Looks like Satan, right? It's actually the Greek god Pan. So, and some would argue that they're actually one and the same. But so this is Pan, and they put it in the fireplace of the library director's office. And the library director at the time, Carolyn, was telling me how it's all bogus and none of this is true. And I said to her, well, wait a minute, Carolyn, if you don't believe in any of these stories, why is there a Bible on top of Pan in your fireplace? And she looks at me and she goes, oh, it couldn't hurt. Has anybody ever been to Amityville Railroad in Carver? Yeah, it's a great place, right? Everybody goes there. They love to ride the train, see all the Christmas lights. Nobody thinks about the fact that Amityville is severely haunted while they're there. There's a house on the property, the house on the top of the hill. They call that the House of Three Suicides because 3 different people have killed themselves in that house over the years. But I went there mainly because I wanted to investigate the stories that I've heard about the rest of the grounds. Native Americans that are said to roam the park because that was once their land. And the most intriguing story is that the founder of Amityville, Ellis Atwood, haunts Amityville, and that his wife Althea can be seen roaming the grounds in her wedding dress looking for her lost love. Now, Ellis Atwood actually died because there was a boiler explosion in this building. It's now the museum building, but in his day, it was the screen house for his cranberry operation. And he was working alone one night when the boiler went out, so he went down into the basement to try to get it restarted. There was an explosion, and Ellis died. Not on the property, but at the hospital later as a result of his injuries. But that's what led to his death. So we were down in the basement. We were trying to find out if we could communicate with Ellis. We weren't even thinking about the fact that perhaps his wife might show up. Now, I had talked to him before through the use of a Ouija board. Not everybody believes in Ouija boards, but I know I wasn't moving the planchette, and the person that I was doing it with was blind. So I'm pretty sure it wasn't her spelling out all the words. But we had thought we had communicated with Ellis, so we figured if we go down to the basement, maybe he'll come through again. So we're down there trying to get whatever we could get to happen, when all of a sudden we all look up at the staircase that goes down into the basement, and there we see a woman in a white dress, translucent, coming down the stairs with her arms outstretched, coming toward us. She got about this far away, and then she disappeared. And I turned to everybody else. I was like, you're all seeing this, right? And the 6 other people that were in the room all saw the exact same thing. It is the only time in my 20 years or so of being a paranormal investigator that I ever saw a full-bodied apparition. And I'm actually hoping that next year we can go back there and investigate now that there's new operating partners that have taken over. This is War Memorial Park in West Bridgewater. We did an investigation, our first ever real in Bridgewater Triangle event. We did that in 2017 or 18. And when we went to War Memorial Park, there had really been no stories of ghostly activity there, but it was related to the Bridgewater history. Reverend Keith was the first preacher of Bridgewater, and he actually gave a sermon on a rock there called Pulpit Rock. So we thought we were going to go to Pulpit Rock and maybe have some connections. But as it turns out, there used to be a shovel factory that was on that site. And what we saw that night was we saw shadow people walking in procession through this little underground area. And at first we were trying to figure out why there would be this line of people coming through. And then the gentleman who was actually investigating with me, who lives right down the street, was like, you know what? It's probably the people that worked at the shovel factory going in or coming out of work. So it's a great place to check out. It's a nice little park, but you could also go there at night and poke around for yourself and see if you see any shadow people. Just be careful because there's a lot of residential areas around it. You don't want to disturb anybody. This is the Emery Estate in Weymouth. Has anybody ever been to the Emery Estate? It's on a hill. It's King Oak Hill Park. It's a beautiful place. And the park was actually donated to the town of Weymouth from the Emery family while there were still Emerys that were living in the house. But the last member of the family died in 2010. The town bought it, I believe, in 2014, and they had no idea what to do with it. It sat empty and fell apart and became very dilapidated. And the woman who helped resurrect the Oliver Estate in Middleborough, Christie, has now taken over the Emery Estate and is trying to do the same thing, using the paranormal to try to raise money to restore this beautiful property. And she was telling me for months how incredible it was there. And I said, yeah, I'll get there eventually. So the first time I get there and I investigated, there's a closet on the 3rd floor. Now, the Emerys were a very religious family. They were so religious, in fact, they were followers of Billy Graham. Whenever Billy Graham came to Boston, Mr. Emery would go to Boston, pick him up, drive him back to their estate, and he would spend the time that he was here staying at their house. So Billy Graham has actually walked through that house before. And so we're trying to communicate with whoever might be there. And in this closet, people reported being touched. So I'm standing in the closet, and I've got kind of my arms down by my side, and I felt something almost like leaning on my shoulder over here. And then it was leaning on this shoulder as well, almost like I was trying to help it stand up. And I said, can you do anything else? I don't know, I'm really sore. Can you give me a back rub or something? And I felt what felt like hands massaging my shoulders. Which, okay, fine, that's a personal experience. It's not any kind of data that I can show you. But the next week, when a different team came in and investigated, they caught a recording of a voice that came through and said, where's Weisberg? So it was actually asking for me the week after I had been there. So we went back a couple more times, and I was just there in July of this year. When we had really, really great investigation. We were getting a lot of stuff that comes through. I use a device called EchoVox, which you've probably seen people use ghost boxes where they sweep through radio waves and ghosts supposedly use those words from the radio to communicate. I think those give way too many false positives. I use EchoVox instead, which uses phonetic human speech. So there's no words, there's just phonetic sounds. And it goes through these 6 different banks, and it goes through randomly, and it really shouldn't stop on a word, but yet you'll get whole sentences that come through. And we were getting little bits and pieces throughout the course of the night. We even got a couple of things that might have been religious, but it wasn't all overtly religious. Later on that night, we were investigating in the room that Reverend Billy Graham would stay in, and we got what was basically a sermon coming out of this thing. Not only telling us all about God and about religious things, but also chastising the 2 people in the room that were Wiccan for being heathens. And at the end of the night, when everybody had gone home, it was just myself and Christy and Rick, who helps her with the property. And Rick was putting some stuff out in his car, and I'm just sitting in the parlor talking to Christy, when all of a sudden one of the shades just goes and rolls up on its own. Okay, that could be anything. That could be, it wasn't pulled down all the way, and that was going to happen eventually anyway. Rick comes back in, and Rick is like, who's upstairs? Nobody's upstairs. He goes, I can hear voices upstairs. So I go over to the staircase and I can hear them too. So we're thinking maybe somebody left something on. Maybe they left a device behind. So we go up and we start walking through, and we can hear, as we're on the second floor, we hear footsteps on the third floor and voices on the third floor. So we go up to the third floor. There's nobody there. We go back down to the second floor. Again, the same thing. We're just hearing footsteps and voices. This went on for about 45 minutes. Finally, we're like, we're going to leave. We have to go. We'll see you next time. And we start getting ready to head down the stairs, and Rick hears a female voice say out loud, "Close the door." And it was referring to, they have a sun porch on the second floor, and he had left the door open to it. So he went over and he closed that door and he locked it. And when he did that, I heard a female voice say, "Thank you." So we're going back there. We'll get into that in a minute, but we're going to be going back there, and I'm hoping that we can communicate with those same spirits. But we'll wrap this up talking about what's probably the most famous place in the Bridgewater Triangle when it comes to hauntings. How many folks have been to the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River? Well, I'm going to share with you some of the best experiences I've had there in my probably 24 investigations that I've done there. The first time that I ever went to the Lizzie Borden house, I took the tour and I didn't feel like it was haunted at all. And I actually said on the radio, like, I don't know, I just didn't feel anything there. Well, a few months after that, one of our listeners out in California rented the place out for the night for her birthday and said, "I want you to come investigate with me." So we went and we investigated with her. And as I'm walking around on the third floor, I started to get like tired, and it wasn't anything paranormal. At the time, I was waking up every morning at 4 a.m. to cook in a diner, and then I would go and I'd work a second job at the newspaper, and then I'd go out and do ghost hunting afterwards. So I'm just exhausted. And so I decided to lay down on one of the beds on the third floor and take a rest. And I had laid like this, but instead of having my legs out, I had them bent over the side. And the reason I laid like that was because I didn't want to have to make the bed. I'm not very good at making beds, so I said, I'm just going to lay on top of the bed here. And as I lay there, I could feel this cold spot developing over my chest, and I got this tingling sensation. So I called everybody into the room. They were in the next room over investigating a sewing machine that supposedly would go off on its own. And they came in and they brought all the devices. Now, the reason why we think that there are cold spots when there's a ghost around is because the ghost is pulling in that energy to manifest. It's an endothermic reaction. So it pulls in the heat energy and it puts out more electromagnetic activity. So the temperature goes down and the EMF field goes up. So they came in with devices to be able to measure those two things. And they put the thermometer over my chest and they said, yeah, it's 10 degrees colder over your chest than it is on your chest, which really doesn't make sense. If I was laying on the bed, the body heat should be rising and it should at least be the same temperature. But instead it was 10 degrees colder. And they were also getting an EMF spike over me as well. So I said, well, if there's somebody here, can you knock on the wall? Can you shake the bed? Can you lift my legs up? And when I said that, I felt two hands wrap around my ankles and start pulling my legs up like that. And they held them straight out like that for a good 15, 20 minutes. Now, I know that you might not be able to tell by looking at me, but I'm not the most athletic person in the world. I'm not in the best physical shape. I can't hold my legs out straight like that for 15, 20 minutes. But it felt to me like my feet were just resting in somebody's hands. And then after a while, it let my feet go. And then I stood up. And the first thing I said is, okay, now somebody else do it. Because I didn't want to be the only person that had it happen, because then who's going to believe me? So a couple of other people tried it. They all had it happen to them. And numerous people have had it happen ever since. So if you ever go to that house and stay there, ask for the Hosea Knowlton room on the third floor and see if you can get your legs lifted up. We actually brought Brian Harnwat from Ghost Hunters there one time. Does anybody remember Brian? He was the guy that yelled, "Dude, run!" And Brian swore to everybody, that was just TV editing. I would never run on an investigation. They just made it look like I did. Well, I can tell you that that night that he was there with us, he tried to get that ghost to lift up his feet too, and he was being very rude about it. And we could see the indent on the top of the sneakers of fingertips, and I knew something was getting ready to happen. And he's pushing it. He's like, come on, you can't do anything. Come on, I knew you couldn't do it. All of a sudden, something grabbed his leg and yanked him off that bed. He got up off the floor, ran down the hallway yelling, "Holy shit!" So for when he says he would never run on an investigation, he's lying. He lies about a lot of things, but that's one thing that he lied about. I've also had a number of other experiences there. I've been thrown up the stairs. I've been thrown down the stairs. I've been scratched at. I've been growled at. I've been pinched. I've been scratched. I've been sworn at. But I was also one time investigating in the room where Mrs. Borden was killed, standing in the spot where her body was found. And the house psychic at the time, was actually getting attacked by something she couldn't see. She claimed Mr. Borden was the one in the room and that he was scratching her. It was summertime, she had on a tank top, so I look over at her and I can see scratches appearing on her chest and on her shoulders without her touching herself. So I was like, well, if you're going to pick on somebody your own size. I won't even fight back. And I put my hands behind my back. And when I did that, something grabbed my elbows and started pushing me. And so I pushed back. And then it pushed me. And then I pushed back. And finally I said, is that all you can do? And as soon as I said that, wham, it just threw me up against the wall. So that's when I realized, oh, wait a minute, there might actually be something to this ghost stuff. But we also have captured some very interesting footage and EVPs from there. So I want to just play those for you real quick. I see that there is a child in the room. There's some profanity here. Is that okay? All right. It's not me that said it. It's the ghosts. You hear this whispery voice come right up to the reporter. And what's interesting is we actually had the reporter on the bed in the middle of the room while the rest of the investigators were standing around it. So nobody was close to this recorder, but yet you hear that voice come right up and whisper right into it. And here's what we think is being said. So I'm going to play that again with it on the screen so that you can see it for yourself. But that's not the worst thing they said to me that night. They really didn't like me there at that point. They never really did like me, but I used to be a lot more forceful in my investigations, and I've since softened. I shook hands with a shadow person at the Houghton Mansion in North Adams, and that changed the way that I perceived ghosts. I no longer walked in there like, show me what you can do, ghost, come on. And it was more like, hi, thank you for letting me in your home. I'd like to talk with you. But at this time, they were still pretty angry at me, and that came through in this clip.
You want to give somebody else a try? I'll take my hands up again.
So here's what we think was being said there. Yeah. So I'm going to play that again with it on the screen.
Somebody else try? I'll take my hands up again.
But I will say not everything that we caught, these were all on the same night too. Not everything we caught was negative. We think we caught the voice of Lizzie Borden herself. And you're going to hear in this clip a female voice with a Victorian lilt to it that's coming from down the hallway when there was nobody down the hallway. We used to have our own key to the Lizzie Borden house. We would be able to let ourselves in to investigate when nobody was staying there, and we were trusted to be alone in the house. So nobody else was there. We would have known if somebody else had come in, but yet you hear this female voice from down the hall.
As you go by.
And here's what we think is being said. Now, we don't know if this means I did it, I killed my mother, my stepmother, and my father, but I was a good daughter, or if it means I couldn't have done it. I'm a good daughter. But we think that this might be Lizzie herself.
As you go by.
And you can kind of hear that Victorian accent to it as well. That same night, we also caught a very interesting piece of video footage. This was in the room on the third floor where my legs were lifted. There is a story about some children that haunt that room. The children were actually killed next door. They were family members of the Bordens, but these murders happened 12 years before Lizzie Borden was even born. The mother, Eliza Borden, had taken her 3 children down to the cistern in the basement, tried to drown them, succeeded in killing 2 of them, and then went upstairs and slit her own throat with her husband's razor. She is said, her children are said to haunt this room, and also Michael, the former caretaker of the house from when it first became a bed and breakfast. So we have a camera that's in this room, hardwired on a chest that just moves on its own. And so the investigators go over there to try to reset it. Now, this is a early 2000s surveillance IR camera. So it's a rounded camera on a heavy metal pedestal base with a hard wire connecting it back into a laptop. We took that hard wire and ran it against the wall so that nobody would trip on the wire. So nobody stepped on a cable that would make it
I
move.
got it right? Is that good? I moved it that time.
Turn to your right. There you go.
So they reset the camera. And now, as you would do in any paranormal investigation when something like that happens, you try to recreate it to see if it was something that you had done. So everybody's going to start stepping on the cable, stomping on the floor.
Even if she hit it like this, it wouldn't. It's not gonna turn it.
Those are not orbs, those are bugs. It was August, we left the door open.
Because I'm stepping on the wire now. Is anything happening? It did it again.
And that time they actually saw it pick up and move toward them. So just an interesting little capture there. I actually had a very interesting experience my last time investigating there. Leanne Wilbur, who used to be the co-owner and the manager, she would call us whenever anything went on. And she would have us come and check it out. And she called us and said, listen, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the house. I need you to come check it out. We said, of course, we'll be there tonight. We went through and investigated for 4 or 5 hours. Nothing out of the ordinary. And when I say that about the Lizzie Borden house, there was a lot of stuff going on, but it was nothing out of the ordinary of what we would normally get there. So at the end of the night, by this time we didn't have our own key, so we would have to lock the door with the key that we were given and then drop it in the mail slot because Leanne was sleeping in the office over the barn out back. She would go in the next day, let herself in, pick up the key. So as we're getting ready and loading up the car, Leanne pops her head out the window and says, how'd it go? Did you get anything? And we said, no, the usual stuff. And she said, okay, well, thank you for coming out. Oh, by the way, why'd you leave the 3rd floor bathroom light on? And I said, no, I did not leave the 3rd, because I go through that house and I turn off every light as I'm going and then I run so that nothing can get me. But I know that I turned that light off. And she said, well, I'm not going to leave it on all night and pay that electric bill. So she comes downstairs, she opens the back door, she picks up the key, she walks upstairs, turns off that light, comes back downstairs, locks the door, and as soon as she locks the door and comes around the corner, 2nd floor bedroom light comes on. Opens the door, goes upstairs, turns that on, comes back out, locks the door, and then 3rd floor bedroom light goes on. Does the same thing, goes upstairs, turns it off, comes back out, locks the door, and then she's standing out in the parking lot talking to us for about 20 minutes and no lights come on. So we figure, all right, it's safe for us to go home. So we say goodnight, she goes upstairs to the barn, we get in the car and we leave. And anybody that knows the Lizzie Borden house knows Fall River. We got to about where Whites of Westport is on 195 heading back to Wareham. And so we're only really like 2 miles, 3 miles from the Lizzie Borden house. And my phone starts ringing. Now it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And I look and I'm like, oh, it's Leanne. Why is she calling? We must have forgot something or something. Hello? And all she said is, what did you do to my house? What do you mean? I'm sitting here looking out the office window and watching as every single light in the house is turning on and off all at the same time. I was like, I don't know. I didn't do that. And she said, you know what? I don't even want to deal with this tomorrow. I don't even want to deal with this tonight. I'll deal with it tomorrow, and I'll just have to eat that electric bill. And not only was that the last time that I investigated there, that was the last time that I saw Leanne, because the pandemic happened not long after that. That kept us from seeing each other. She had some health issues. And then after it was over and things started to open back up again, her partner Donald had decided to sell the house. And he sold it to a man named Lance Zoll, he owns a company called U.S. Ghost Adventures. And in my opinion, he's kind of turned it into a little bit of a sideshow over there now. I don't feel like it's the same place that it was, but whatever, it's his place to do what he wants to since he bought it. There's been some stuff that's come out in recent weeks. One is a story that ran in the Fall River Herald News about how he has stolen tours from other tour companies and stolen some of their scripts and their ideas and even their names. In fact, the man's company is called U.S. Ghost Adventures. It's designed to make people think that he is the other Ghost Adventures from the TV. And there's a coffee shop that opened up this year on the anniversary of the Borden murders right next door to the Lizzie Borden house. It's called Miss Lizzie's Coffee. And Lance has filed a lawsuit against the owner, Joe Pereira, claiming copyright infringement because it's called Miss Lizzie's Coffee, and Lance has a copyright to do business as a restaurant with the name Lizzie Borden. That's not Lizzie Borden as far as I can tell. And he also has a copyright on the hatchet logo that they use, so he says them using a hatchet on their sign is a copyright infringement, even though I've read the copyright, and it's a very specific design of a hatchet. So they're at war. These two neighbors are at war over this whole situation, and it keeps devolving into something worse and worse. But I do find it kind of ironic that the man who is suing him for copyright infringement is the same guy who named his company U.S. Ghost Adventures, and then also supposedly steals stuff from other tours. I did hear that his tour guides tell people that Lizzie Borden actually used to go over to the house and play with her cousins before they were murdered. And I find that to be very fascinating since they were murdered 12 years before Lizzie Borden was born. So I don't know how that works out mathematically. But anyway, the news just came out today that Lance has actually purchased the Villisca Axe Murder House in Villisca, Iowa. So now he owns the other big axe murder house in America. And people are very concerned about this based on what he's done to the Lizzie Borden house. The fact that of the 8 victims that were murdered in the Villisca Axe Murder House, 6 of them were children. So there's concern that he's going to turn that into a bit of a sideshow as well. I'm just going to, keep my powder dry on this and say we'll see what happens. One more time, all of my information here if you want to follow me, and I will thank you all for listening to me talk about ghosts.